Where is the best place to actually put the EQ to get rid of feedback on your microphones? I've made a few videos already, and one of which was a little bit contentious, about ringing out feedback and what's the best way to use EQ in your sound system. But that video and some others generated some questions and insightful comments. And if that was you, thank you for your professional and polite input, and I'm here to address some of those things today. Hey, if you're new here, my name is James and I help worship leaders, sound techs, and church tech directors eliminate the mystery and frustration of sound at church. If that's you, go ahead and mash that subscribe button. When we're talking about EQing feedback out of a system, I have to remind you that we try to take the steps to move the physical things in place first before we try to solve the problem with our electronics. After we've moved things in the right place, or as much as we can, because sometimes the needs of the event just don't fit great with best audio practices, then we start to use our EQ to get the best gain before feedback, or how much we can turn up the signal before it starts to ring. The video I made about that is a pretty quick one, and it'll teach you to avoid the sound tech solo, where people turn around and look at you in the sound booth wondering, why aren't you fixing that thing? As if it was really easy and just automatic and we knew exactly what to do. Well, hopefully, at the end of this video, you will know exactly what to do. Oh, and there's another video I made where I actually walked you through in real time me ringing out some choir mics right over here so that I could get that done for an event where the choir had to be on the front of the stage. Now, the most common place that you will get feedback is with monitor wedges, or the speakers that are on stage facing back at the performers or the speakers so that they can hear themselves. In the best case scenario, we wouldn't have any monitor wedges and people would just use in-ear monitors to hear themselves, but that's not always the case, and so sometimes we have open monitor wedges facing back at the people holding on to the microphones. Because the singer or musician is both the sound source and the audience, we have to break some of the rules and actually point the speaker at the person holding the microphone. So we've got the speakers pointed at the microphone, and we've got the speakers pretty close to the microphone. So to overcome this, we have to be aware of our polar pattern on the microphone, and we have to try to get the best signal to noise ratio for our microphone as well. That means that we tell the performer to keep the mic as close to their sound source, their mouth, or if it's a violin player, their violin, something like that. We want to make sure that we're getting as much signal as we can so that we can turn the mic up less to get it to come through. So where you put the EQ to eliminate feedback in a situation where you have monitor wedges can get a little tricky, and it changes based on the situation. If you're in a situation where you have a separate monitor console, and that is feeding the monitor wedges on stage, and you have consistent brand and make of monitor wedges on stage, you can use the mic's channel EQ to notch out that feedback. And here's why. When you eliminate feedback with a certain mic and monitor combination, and then you take that same microphone over on the other side of the stage to another monitor, you're going to get the similar results, and so the same EQ in one spot can take care of the sound of a lot of different monitor wedges. This also leaves the EQ for the monitor wedge to make the monitor wedge itself sound good. So you can make the entire mix pleasing and at the same time eliminate the feedback that might be coming from that singer's vocal microphone. Another pro tip is to thin out the monitor wedges when you can, because there's usually low mids coming back from the front of house speakers onto the stage, and you want to minimize the amount of stage bleed on those low mid frequencies from the monitor wedges spilling out into the audience. But you got to remember, we're serving artistic people and their needs with their monitor mix, so it's not always up to you as to how thin you can make that monitor wedge. You just have to roll with what works for them and do your best. If you don't have a separate monitor console and your monitor wedges are being fed from the front of house console, this is where I would probably opt to notch out feedback on the monitor send. This leaves all the EQ bands available on the channel input so that you can make front of house sound fantastic. Now there's another situation where we might find feedback, and that's typically from mics that are farther away from the sound source, so we've got a lower signal to noise ratio, but we can't just move everybody closer. Things like choir mics or orchestra mics or group mics of some sort. Other situations that fall into this category are lavalier or headset microphones on your speaker, or on your worship leader if they're going for that Garth Brooks, Britney Spears kind of vibe. These are more likely to feedback through the main speakers, so we're going to have to find a place in between the microphone and the main output that has some notches of EQ to keep these from ringing and feeding back. Channel EQ is one good place to start if your source sounds good through that microphone. If there's not a lot of tonal changes that you have to make, mic and you're just getting rid of feedback, yes, go ahead and use the channel EQ on that microphone to notch out the feedback. If you need the channel EQ to fix tone on the source, or if you run out of bands, you can add another layer of EQ by putting them into a group. Then on the group, you can use EQ to notch out even more frequencies. To run channels through a group, you're going to have to unassign them from the main bus and assign them to this group, then assign that group to the main bus. It's just like it's adding an extra stop of processing between the channel and the main output. So if you're wanting to add a group or a bus to add another layer of EQ, here's how you would do it on a PreSonus Series 3 console. So I've got my handheld channel here, and right now you can see it's assigned to the main bus. This is fine, but we want to actually unassign it to the main bus so that we can assign it to a subgroup that then goes to the main bus. So we have to unassign it from the main so that now, whenever any noise comes through here, it's not going all the way to the master bus. We now have to assign it to a subgroup, and I'm going to choose Mix 1. I select Mix 1, or I could have done it over here on the aux inputs, but either way, I select this here, and we see aux 1 on the screen. If I hit the gear wheel, and then I can change this Flex Mix mode to subgroup. Now it's going to be post everything, right? We're not going to get pre-fader, we're not going to get pre-processing. It's all going to be post-fader and post-processing. And now we have to assign channels to it, but you can see it doesn't have anything here. So now that we've created this as a subgroup, if we go back to main mix and select our handheld channel, we can hit input, and then on the assign, we can hit subgroup. Now this page comes up and we can see sub 1 is available. Instead of aux 1, it's called sub 1, and now I've assigned it to it. So now it's going there. I also need to make sure that my mix masters, when I hit select sub 1, that it's assigned to the main. I can unassign it if I want to, but we want to make sure that it is assigned so that it gets there. Now I've got this 6-band EQ that I can use to notch out any more feedback from those microphones that are fed to that subgroup. The reason you can't use a DCA to do this is because DCAs or VCAs cannot use any audio processing. They're just a remote control of the fader. So just like I couldn't put an EQ on my TV's remote control, you can't put EQ or compression on a VCA. Since these types of mics are sometimes omnidirectional and often farther away from the sound source, you want to try to avoid putting these into monitor wedges at all costs. Well, not really all costs, but if you can get away with it, do it. There was one time I was doing an event that had a choir, and they were struggling to hear themselves on the choir risers in this gymnasium. So instead of trying to get their mics into the monitors, which I knew was a fool's errand, I went and found some dividers from Sunday school that were on casters, and we could wheel them in and kind of turn them into a makeshift choir deflector. This way, the sound coming from the back of people bounced back off and over to the other side of the choir so they could hear one another sing and sing in tune better. And best of all, I didn't have to try to get those microphones in the monitor wedge. And although I got a lot of flack and a lot of comments from people in my other video about not using your main EQ to ring out feedback, I still think that's not the best practice and not the first place to go for sure when you're trying to get feedback out of microphones. Would I do it in a pinch? Of course I would, but again, it's not the first way I'm going to go. So hopefully this video cleared up any confusion on best practices and my opinion on how you should use EQ to get rid of feedback. If you're wanting to go deeper in how the entire sound system works, from sound source all the way to the speakers and everything in between, I'd encourage you to check out my Attaway Audio Academy for church sound techs, worship leaders, and tech directors. In there, you'll find my Amateur to Pro course, where I take you through the entire sound system and all the details that you need to be aware of when you're setting things up, troubleshooting, and just trying to do things your best. It'd be great if you got out of a pinch in a hurry and the sound system wasn't a mystery anymore. You can check it out through the link down in the description below. As always, remember, it's all about the low end, avoid the sound tech solo, and nobody leaves church humming the kick drum. We'll see you back here next time on Attaway Audio.